Alright, so the notes for today are section 2.5, which is solving with slope-intercept form given 2 points. Go ahead and write down the learning target on your paper. So your goal for today is that by the time the notes are done, you should be able to use algebra and y equals mx plus b to find the equation of a line that passes through 2 points. And so this part is what makes it be a little bit different than what we did in section 2.4. So you're going to be given some different information. Don't worry about writing down these definitions. We already wrote them down on the notes from a previous day. So we're going to start right here with number 1. It says consider a line that passes through the points -2, 5, so that one's right here, and then 4, 2, so that one's right here. They want us to find the slope of the line, so we can go ahead and use a straight edge to connect those 2 points. The first question, A, says find the slope between the 2 points, and so there's 2 ways that you can do this. You could count from this point to this point, and so I'll show you that way, but then we can also use the formula for slope, and so I'll also show you the work for that one. To count the slope, let me grab a different color out. So to get from the point on the left to the point on the right, notice that the graph is falling, it's going down. So it goes down 1, 2, 3, and then it goes to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you wanted to find the slope that way, it would be down 3 over 6. I'm going to write this over here. Down 3 and then 6 to the right. So that means that the slope of the line is going to be -1/2. And so because you had the picture, you can figure that out just by counting it on the picture. I also want to remind you though that if this is x1, y1, and if this one's x2, y2, you can find the slope using the slope formula, which says y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. This is going to be important that you remember how to do this, because later down here in number 2, we're going to be doing this when we're not going to have a picture. So being able to use the slope formula will be helpful. Review your notes from, it was either 2.2 or 2.3 if you feel a little bit shaky about how to find slope, because this is a really important skill to know. So it's going to be y2 minus y1, remember the y's go in the top, and then x2 minus x1. Be careful here, because this is 2 negatives in a row, and minus minus is going to turn into a plus. 2 take away 5 is -3 in the top, and then 4 plus 2 is +6 in the bottom. And so I get the same answer 1/2 as I did when I just counted on the picture. If you have the picture, you don't have to do it this way, but later on we're going to do it without a picture, so it's good to know how to do that. The second part of the question says use algebra to find the y-intercept and then check your answer with the graph. So we could come over here to the graph. If we know that the slope is down 1 and 2 to the right, down 1 and 2 to the right, this is the y-intercept right here. Remember, the y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. So we actually already know that the answer is b equals 4, but right here I'm going to show you a way that you can use the BMXY chart, BMXY, because remember our goal is to be able to do this when we don't have a picture. So the b is what you don't know yet, and we figured out that the slope was -1/2, and so here's how this problem is a little bit different than the ones we did in 2.4. In 2.4 we only had 1 point, so we used the point that they gave us. We used that x and that y, and we plugged them in here. But for this one, there's 2 points that you can pick from. So here's the deal. It doesn't matter whether you use this one or whether you use this one, because both of these are points on the line. So you can use the one that you feel better about. Sometimes students like to pick one that has more positives. So I'll do that for this one. I put the x in for the x and the y in for the y. The only thing I can't do is I can't use this x and use this y. So you have to use the x and the y from the same point. I like to circle the point that I'm using just so that I remember which one I'm using. Okay. So y equals mx plus b, and then I'm going to plug the numbers in. 2 equals -1/2 times 4 plus b. Half of 4 is 2, and so -half of the 4 would be -2. And remember, what I'm doing right here is I'm trying to figure out what the b is. So to finish solving for b, I would add the 2 to both sides, and I'm going to get b equals 4, which is the same thing that we confirmed when we looked at the picture. To write the equation of the line in slope-intercept form, we're going to write it in this y equals mx plus b form. There's 2 things that you need. So you need to know the m, which we know because we figured out the slope both by counting on the picture and by using the slope formula. And then you need to know the y-intercept, which we also found two ways. We found it by looking on the picture, and then we also found it by solving. And so that's good, because that means that we have everything we need. So the answer to the question is y equals negative 1/2 x plus 4. Negative because the line's going down, and then positive 4 for the y-intercept because it crosses right here at positive 4. So this is the equation of that line. Okay, so here on example number 2, these are the kind of problems that we're aiming for. So these are the way that they're going to look when you see them, like on the test, or we practiced the skill we practiced in number 1 so that we could do questions like here on number 2. So the first one says we're trying to find the equation of a line that goes through the 2 points. So I right away like to label them x1, y1 and x2, y2. There's 3 questions down here. We're probably only going to end up doing 2 of them because the process for all of them is the same. Write a little bit smaller than you normally do though, just so that you have enough space underneath them. Okay. In order to write the equation of a line, we practiced this up above in the previous question. You need to know the m and you need to know the b. So what's different about these questions than the ones we did in 2.4 is on 2.4 they told us the slope and then they told us one of the points that was on the line. So in today's notes, we have to start by finding the slope first. We can't do a BMXY chart until we know what the slope is. So I'm going to start by finding the slope. I don't always write down the slope formula on every problem that I do with slope. So I'm just going to put the parentheses where they go. But if it helps you to write down the slope formula first and then plug the points in so that you make sure you get them in the right place, then you should do that on your papers. Okay. 5 minus negative 1 over 3 minus 6. And then remember with slope you're going to simplify. Minus minus turns into a plus. So let's see, that's going to give me positive 6 in the top, and then negative 3, because 3 take away 6 will give me negative 3 in the bottom. And so my slope for this one works out to be negative 2, because 6 divided by 3 turns into negative 2. Now, we have the same information that we did yesterday in section 2.4, rather, because now you know the slope, and the slope is one of the things that you need to find the equation of the line, but we still don't know the y-intercept. So now is when I'm going to do my BMXY chart. What I want you to remember from these notes right here is if you don't know the slope to start, you have to start by finding the slope, and then it's the same as section 2.4. It doesn't matter which point you pick. I'll go ahead and pick the first one just to give you some variety. So remember, this is going to go in for my m, negative 2, and then my x is going to be 6, and my y will be negative 1. But if you picked this point, and if you put that for your x and your y, remember, you'll get the same answer to the question as I will. Y equals mx plus b, and then I'm going to plug in the numbers that I have. So negative 1 is equal to negative 2 times 6 plus b. And then you're just going to go through and solve for b. Remember, you're trying to get the b all by itself, so you'll add the 12 to both sides. And so for this one, I'm going to get that my y-intercept for this graph will be at the point 0, 11. In order to write the equation of a line, you need 2 things. So you need to know an m and you need to know a b. And that's good because for this one, that means that I have everything that I need. So when I write my answer to the question, I'm going to put the m in for the m, I'm going to put the b in for the b, but then I'm going to take out that x and the y that I had put in before, and I'm just going to write my answer with an x and a y in it. So this is the equation of the line that contains the point 6, negative 1, and it also contains the point 3, positive 5. Okay. Both of these problems are going to be the same process. So we'll start by finding the slope. You're welcome to work ahead on these if you want to. Just make sure that you come back to check your answers if you decide to work ahead. Here's my x1, y1, and here's my x2, y2. So let's see, 2 minus negative 13 over 4 minus negative 8. Minus minus turns into a plus, minus minus turns into a plus. So that means for this one, let's see, I'm going to get positive 15 in the top, and then I'm going to get positive 12 in the bottom. 15 doesn't divide by 12 evenly, but you can simplify it. 3 can go into 15, it goes in 5 times, and then 3 can go into 12, it goes in 4 times. So for this one, my slope's going to be 5 over 4, and I'm going to keep it as a fraction in my work just because I find it easier. But remember, you could turn it into a decimal, and that would be fine too. It doesn't matter which point I'll use. I'm just going to pick the second one for variety. I would also personally pick the second point on this one because This point has big numbers and they're both negative. And so sometimes students make mistakes with larger numbers or with negatives. So if you feel like that's something that has happened to you before, pick the point that has smaller numbers or pick the point that has more positive numbers in it. All right, so I picked a point and now I'm going to plug it in. Y equals mx plus b. And then remember, you're going to plug in the numbers that you have. Don't be concerned about the fraction. Remember, you get a calculator on the test, so if you're worried about the fractions, don't be. You can always just type this into your calculator, but the number in the bottom crosses out with the number in the top. Those both turn into ones. You still have the 5 left over, though. And then to finish this one, you'll minus the 5 from both sides. So now, oops, there you go. Now you know your b, and you've finished and you found your m up here, and so it's going to be y equals 5/4 x minus 3, and that'll be the answer to that question. Okay, we're not going to do the work for C because it would be exactly the same as the two of these, but I just want to talk about the process before we move on to the next question. The reason why it's different than the notes from the day before this one is because you didn't have to find the slope on the last time. So if they give you 2 points, you have to do this part first, but if you cover this part up, this part looks the same as the 2.4 notes did. So it's not really that different, it's just that you have to start by finding this extra piece of information. So in the back of the notes, it starts off with 2 definitions. So we're talking about parallel lines and perpendicular lines. One thing that I want you to make sure that you notice before you write these definitions down is that it does say lines. So for these ones, you're talking about 2 different lines. On the other side of the notes, we were just talking about 1 line, but these ones are talking about different lines. So when you're talking about parallel lines, you could be talking about 2 lines, or you could be talking about, more. You could talk about 3 or 4. When you talk about perpendicular lines, you're usually talking about 2, but you could be talking about more. Parallel lines are 2 lines that never intersect. They have the same slope and they have different y-intercepts. So if one of your lines was y equals 1/4 x plus 5, and if your other line was y equals 1/4 x minus 3, these 2 lines are never going to cross each other. So they would both look a little something like this if you graphed them. One of the y-intercepts would be down lower than the other one, but these 2 lines would both be going up at the same rate, so they would never cross each other. So the picture should help you with this one. Parallel lines never intersect each other. Perpendicular lines have a harder definition because you have to know this word reciprocal, so we'll practice that down here a little bit. Perpendicular lines are 2 lines that intersect to form a 90-degree angle. So the picture for these ones is going to look a little bit different. Here, let's see. It's going to look something like this. In different forms. But when the 2 lines cross, they're going to make a 90-degree angle. So let's see. One of the lines might be y equals, 2x plus 6. And then the other line could be y equals negative 1/2 x minus 4. And so it's not these numbers that matter. It's these numbers right here that I want you to look at. So when you're finding out if lines are perpendicular or not, one of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative. Or it could be the other way. This one could be negative and this one could be positive. That's the opposite part. So one of them will be plus and one of them will be minus. But then the word reciprocal is a word that you might not have seen before. So underneath reciprocal, I want you to write the word flip. So one of them has to be flipped upside down from the other one. If you flip 1/2 upside down, you get 2/1, which would just be written as 2. In example number 3, we get to practice that. So, just kidding. In example number 4, we get to practice that. In example number 3, we're practicing parallel. Give an example of a line that would be parallel to the given line. So if you had a line that was going to be parallel to this line, it would have to start with the same slope, and then the y-intercept could be anything you wanted it to be. Plus 8. This number doesn't matter. It's this number that matters. Parallel lines have the same slope. So same thing on this one. Y equals negative 2x plus 7. It doesn't matter what number you put here. Again, you're just saying that you acknowledge that the 2 lines have the same slope. Minus 5, and then on this one it would be y equals 3x minus, again, 2. This number doesn't matter, it's just the number that goes in front of the x that matters because that's the slope. So parallel lines, let's make a note about this. That's not how you spell the word slope. Parallel lines have the same slope, and that'll be important when we get to example number 5. All right, let's practice the harder one now. Give an example of a line that would be perpendicular to the given line. So perpendicular slopes are opposite reciprocals. And so opposite means one will be positive, the other one has to be negative, and then reciprocals means that the one we come up with has to be the flip of the one that's there. So we'll practice that in this example right here. Y equals 2/3 x minus 5. So in a line that's perpendicular to this line, this slope is positive, 2/3, so this slope would have to be negative. And then if this one's 2/3, the perpendicular slope would be 3/2. So that's where I come up with this number. I take this one and flip it upside down, and then if it's positive, I make it negative, but if it were negative, I would have made it positive. It doesn't matter what number you put here, it's just this part that we're looking at. So we're just comparing the numbers in front of the x. You can put whatever number you want to right here. On this one, it starts out negative, so mine's going to be positive. And then think about the -2 like being -2/1. So when you flip this upside down, it would turn into 1/2. Again, you're flipping the slope upside down. It doesn't matter what number you put for the y-intercept because you're just giving an example of a line that would be perpendicular. But let's take a minute and make sure you saw how that changed. This one was negative, so this one's positive, and then this one was 2/1, so this one flipped and it turned into 1/2. On this one it started out negative, so mine will be positive, and then again I just flip the slope upside down and I can put any y-intercept that I want to. And then on this one it started out positive, so my perpendicular slope will be negative, and then I'll flip it upside down, so it'll turn into 1/3, and then it doesn't matter what I put for the y-intercept. So again, on example number 4, you're comparing the numbers in front of the x. Positive, negative, and then they're both the flip upside down of each other. Negative, positive, and then they're both the flip upside down. Negative, positive, and they're both the flip upside down. And then positive, negative, and they're both the flip upside down. Alright, so before we start example number 5, I'm going to read the directions and talk about how you know these ones are different. It says write the equation in slope-intercept form and then give the equation also in slope-intercept form of a line that meets the given conditions. So here's what's tricky about these ones. They're talking about two different lines. They're talking about one line goes through this point and it's parallel to this other line. I'm going to underline the word parallel. If you have a highlighter and if you'd rather highlight it, that's important because we're going to need to see that word when we do this question. On B, it says it's parallel to this line. On A number 2, I guess this could say C, right? And this one could say D. On this one it says perpendicular, and then on this one it says perpendicular. So we'll need to go back to the definitions of those words to help us when we're solving. Let's see. The first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what our slope is supposed to be. So let me remind you that they're talking about two lines. They give us the equation of one line right here, and we're trying to find the equation of the other line. But on A, they tell us the lines are parallel. So if I minus the 2x from both sides, negative 3y is equal to negative 2x plus 15. And then if I divide everything by negative 3, y equals positive 2/3 x minus 5. This is an important first step because my first line has a slope of 2/3. So when I do my BMXY chart to figure out the equation of the second line, that's the one I'm trying to find, I'm going to use this slope right here. If this said perpendicular, I would need to flip this upside down and make it negative, but it says parallel, so I'm going to keep it just the same. And then from the directions, they gave you a point that was on the other line. So my x is 9, my y is 6, and I'm ready to plug everything in. Y equals mx plus b. So 2/3 times 9 plus b. Remember that on the test you can use your calculator to do this. 3 goes into 9 3 times, and then 2 times 3 is 6. And so on this one, when I minus the 6 from both sides, I'm going to get b is equal to 0. And so my answer to the question is the equation of the line that goes through this point and is parallel to this line. So my actual answer, like my finished answer to the question for this one, is going to be y equals 2/3 x. And then remember, normally I would put this plus 0 right over here. or whatever number I get here, I would write over here, but because it's 0, I'm just going to leave it as y equals 2/3 x. So it's only missing the number right here because that number happened to work out to be the number 0. Okay. This line and this line are parallel, and we know that from what we practiced up above because they have the same slope and they have different y-intercepts. So all 4 of these problems do start out with solving to get the y all by itself. So let's see, on this one I'll minus the x from both sides. And then I'll divide everything by -2 because I'm trying to get the y all by itself. So this one's going to be y equals positive 1/2 x plus 4. The 4 doesn't matter because I did all of this work just to figure out what the slope was. So on this one, I did all the work to figure out that the slope was 2/3. On this one, I did all that work to figure out that the slope of this line was going to be positive 1/2. And parallel means I'm going to use that same slope. So now I'll do my BMXY chart. My x is 4, my y is -3. I worked out that my slope was positive 1/2. And so now I'm going to use that, and I'll plug it into y equals mx plus b, and I'll use it to solve for b. So let's see. -3 is equal to positive 1/2 times 4 plus b. Half of 4 is 2. And so on this one, your y-intercept works out to be -5. So this was the equation of the first line. And y equals 1/2 x minus 5 is going to be the equation of your second line. So this line goes through this point and is parallel to this line. When you do the work for these last two, the directions for the questions look exactly the same. So that's why I started and went through and wrote down and underlined the word perpendicular, because I didn't want you to miss that important direction. Everything I do to start this question is going to feel exactly the same, but there's just one little change that I'm going to need to do something a little bit different, and it's really easy to forget about. So y equals -2/3 x plus 5. So the reason why I did all of this was to figure out the slope of the first line. Now I know that the equation of the line is going to go through this point 8, 2, but it's not parallel to this line, it's perpendicular to that line. And so that's where I need to do a little bit something different. I'm still going to do a BMXY table. I'm still going to put 8, 2 in for my point, but this is what's different. This is the slope, and when I do my new line, the new line is supposed to be perpendicular. So this was -2/3. So when I put the slope into my new problem, I need to plug in 3/2, not -2/3. One was negative, so the perpendicular slope would be positive, and then this one is 2/3, so this one gets plugged in as 3/2. That's tricky, and it's really hard to remember when you're doing these because you have so many other steps to remember. So make sure that you practice doing some of these and reading the directions to know how you're supposed to start them. Alright, let's see. Remember, type this into your calculator if you feel uncomfortable with the fraction, but 2 goes into 8 4 times. And so you get for this one that your y-intercept is -10. And so the answer to the question, again, be careful, it's this slope that you're going to put on your answer, because your line is supposed to be perpendicular to the initial line. So y equals 3/2 x minus 10 is the equation of the line that goes through the point 8, 2 and is perpendicular to this given line right here. Alright, and then the work for the last one that I changed to D, the process will be exactly the same. We're going to start by getting rid of the y. So let's see. Plus the 6x on both sides. So 2y is equal to 6x plus 18. And then you'll divide everything by 2. So you actually don't have to remember that it says perpendicular until you're done getting the y all by itself, so that you can see what the slope is. And then when you plug it into the BMXY table, this will be your x, this will be your y. So -3, 5. And then your slope right here, this is where it changes because it does say perpendicular. So it was positive, so I'll plug in a negative, and it was positive 3/1. If it helps you, draw the little under 1. So this one's going to be 1/3, -1/3. y equals mx plus b, and then I'll go through and I'll solve. Negative 1/3 times negative 3. We'll have to be careful with our negatives here. Negative times a negative is a positive, and 3 goes into 3 once, so that means that this is going to be a 1. So 4 is equal to b. That means for this one, the equation of my perpendicular line, it's not going to be 3x, it's going to be negative 1/3 x, because you have to use the perpendicular slope, and then plus 4. So this is the equation of the line that goes through the given point and is perpendicular to this line. And you can confirm that you wrote the right slope in by comparing the slopes. If it's perpendicular, one will be positive, one will be negative, and then this one and this one will be the flip upside down of each other.